Hello, welcome to our Bible study. We're going to be looking at Psalm 91 tonight. Now, as we begin, let me just say I feel very much like the Apostle Paul and Moses at this particular moment. The Apostle Paul, writing to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians, tells them that he came before them with much fear and trembling, without excellent words or without great oratory skills. Moses, when God appeared to him in the burning bush in the land of Midian, Moses, one of his excuses is that I am of a slow tongue. And some people interpret that to mean he had a stutter. Others tend to think that he is saying, I have lost my courtly manners from growing up in the court, and I can't speak to Pharaoh anymore. I'm just a poor shepherd, and I talk and act like a redneck shepherd from out in the middle of the desert someplace. Well, I really feel that I lack the eloquence, the vocabulary, and the ability to be able to really express this psalm. This is probably one of the greatest psalms there is. It's not as well known as Psalm 23, though it only has 16 verses. A lot of people don't memorize this, though I would encourage you that this is a psalm to memorize. If we look at the psalm, there is no title. Some of the Psalms have titles, some of them do not. Now, the book of Psalms is divided into 4 different books. This is in the last book of the Psalms, and most of the Psalms in this last book, we don't know who the author is. Traditionally, the majority of the first book is David. In this last book, there might be some of David. There may be some with a title that tells us that Asaph wrote this or so-and-so wrote this. But this one has no title at all. It doesn't tell us any musical notes, that this is to be played on a string instrument. It doesn't say if it's to be chanted. It doesn't just tell us anything. So we're kind of left on our own. Is this an instruction? Is this prophecy? Is this promise? And I'm going to say pretty much yes. Now, this psalm, while it doesn't have a biblical title, it has many titles that have been given to it over the years. This is known as, very popularly, the soldier's psalm. And when you read this, especially when you look at expressions that they should not be afraid of the terror by night or the arrows that flies by day, the idea of the arrow is warfare, so we could change that to bullets in our world today. And we can definitely see how this could be a soldier's psalm, a soldier's prayer. Matter of fact, there is a story, and I cannot say that this is a true story. It is told to be truth, but I am not able to verify it. But the story is told that during World War I, the 91st Expeditionary Brigade of the U.S. Army, their commanding officer had cards printed up with this psalm on it. And he passed these out to every one of his men, and they all agreed that they would daily recite this poem. If they were able to recite it in a group, they would. Excuse me. If they were not able to recite it in a group, they would recite it to themselves. So, the 91st Brigade was engaged in at least 3 of the fiercest, most bloodiest battles in World War I's European theater. Now, during this time, casualty rates for different groups were between 80 and 90%. And the story is this, that the 91st lost no men to death. Again, I cannot confirm that, but if it is a true story, it really, you understand why it is called the soldier's psalm. Modern day, we call it the policeman's psalm, we call it the firefighter, the first responder, anyone who is put in a situation of danger on a possibly daily basis has claimed this to be their psalm. It is also called the plague psalm because it talks about plague, it talks about pestilence. And if we look at that title, definitely with the worldwide pandemic going on, it is something that we really need today. Now, pushing all that aside, I think Psalm 91 is about how we can live fearlessly. A number of years ago, I don't know if it's still popular or not, but the youth culture used to wear these t-shirts and different shirts that said, "Fear not." And I think this is the whole gist of this psalm. Whoever wrote this is telling God's people, we do not have to live fearfully. We live in a culture of fear in our country. And I believe in our whole world is actually living in a culture of fear right now because of rioting, because of political disagreements, because of the pandemic that is going on, so many things that are going on. I believe as well that our fear is being perpetuated in our land, in our world, by our entertainment. Now, if I tell you that I like horror movies, this is what I mean when I say I like horror movies. I like the old B-grade, black and white movies. And I can move into the colored movies a little bit too, but I'm talking about, Abbott and Costello Meet the Wolfman. I'm talking about Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, Peter Cushing, those kinds of horror movies. I am not a big fan. No, I am not a fan at all of Friday the 13th, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, any of those types of movies. I am just really not a big fan of those. But there are a lot of people that those are the kinds of movies they watch. And not only that, we have movies like The Purge, where for one night and one night only, all crime is illegal in America, and you can do whatever you want to that particular night. Now, if I've got that wrong, I'm sorry. I've not seen the movies because I'm just not that way. I don't like those. Matter of fact, if you start looking at your television programs, a few years ago, they would tell you this is rated PG-14, recommending that kids under 14 do not watch this movie. Now, it will be PG-14, and there will be graphic violence, adult language, adult situation, smoking, and fear as being a possible side, being portrayed in these particular movies. I believe that the most fearsome people in America are the people who live in the Beverly Hills area, where all these producers and actresses live. According to a recent statistics, there is one practicing psychiatrist for every 5 people that live in Hollywood. Fear is contagious, and fearful people are dangerous people because they want to share their fear. Now, if we are absolutely honest about this, we all have to admit that we have anxieties, we have worries, we have apprehensions, misgivings, qualms, frights, scares, intimidations, alarms, faint-heartedness, and just raw emotion of fear from time to time. Therefore, Psalm 91 relates to us all to one degree or another degree. No one knows what it's like not to be afraid sometimes. We have experienced things in our childhood, in our adulthood, or both, that have kind of left us with different kinds of traumas. We are bombarded daily in our entertainment, in our news, our papers, just constantly. A culture of fear and death. There's the threat of war, there's global warming, there's the uncertainty of the stock market, there's gloom and doom all around us. Now, I like the study of phobias. I don't actually like the study of phobias. I just like the names of phobias. Now, some of phobias are very normal in that we know what they are. Everybody kind of knows about claustrophobia. That's the fear of closed-in spaces. There are people who know about the opposite of that, agoraphobia, which is actually fear of the marketplace, literally translated, but it means the fear of wide open places. But let me share with you a few phobias that are fairly common, but not quite as well known. First of all, there is cyberphobia, the fear of computers. There is ecclesiophobia, which is the fear of church or the fear of preachers. There is lunophobia, the fear of the moon. There is astrophobia, the fear of lightning. There is chromatophobia, which is the fear of money. There is europhobia, which is fear of the color red. There is homilophobia. Now, homilophobia, I have this one. I will readily admit to this. And a lot of you have this one too. And there are a lot of people that aren't watching this who have this fear as well. Now, my brain of this is a little different than other people's. Homilophobia is the fear of sermons. For most people, it is the fear of listening to sermons. For me, it is the fear of come Sunday morning, well, say Saturday, and I've worked all week and I don't know what I'm going to preach the next day. So I've got like less than 24 hours to really get this nailed down. And then I have the fear of waking up on Sunday morning and God saying, you know that sermon you've worked on all week long? Just throw it in the garbage can. I got something else I want you to do. Now, I do my best to accommodate that, but it just scares me to death. And then, like the Apostle Paul, sometimes I have the fear of standing in front of people because to whom much is given, much is required. And being a pastor, being a preacher is a great phobia. Or not a great phobia, it is a great responsibility. My favorite phobia, and I like this because I just love to say this word, and I work it in whenever I can, which is not often, but it's trichodecaphobia. Just say that with me. Trichodecaphobia. That is the fear of the number 13. So I usually only get to use that around Friday the 13th. There is the fear of baldness, pileodophobia, and then there is phobophobia, the fear of fear itself. Now, there is no end of the fears that we can talk about and we can experience. Here in Arkansas, a number of years ago, a woman was sitting in the parking lot of a store that was in a kind of dangerous, seedy part of the city. She was waiting for her husband, who had gone inside to purchase some things. And she was scared because, well, it's a high crime rate area to begin with. And the longer she sat there, the more she thought about what could happen. And she became more and more and more afraid. And suddenly there was a loud bang, and something hit her in the back of the head. And instinctively, like we would probably all do, she reaches back here and she does this, and she feels something gooey at the back of her head. And she's just sitting in the car like this for several minutes, waiting on her husband to come, when somebody parks close by and is walking by and sees her just there with her hands like this. And he goes, "Ma'am, are you all right?" And the lady goes, "I've been shot in the back of the head and I'm holding my brains in." The man looked at her and didn't know what to say or to do. Well, she had not been shot in the back of her head. Because it was hot and they had previously been at the grocery store, there was a can of Womp biscuits there. You know, those are the kind that you womp on the counter and it pops open. Well, because of the heat, the biscuits had gotten hot, started to rise, and popped the can open, causing it to explode. And some of the dough hit her in the back of the head. I tell you this because most of our fears are like that of this lady's. They are unfounded and they are irrational. Now, I am not going to do a verse-by-verse study of this. I am going to bring more of a sermon that I hope takes the key points of this passage and helps you and I as we deal with fear day by day. What is fear? Webster's defines fear as an unpleasant emotion caused by the anticipation or the awareness of danger. Fear is a learned response. We begin to perceive a threat because we have been conditioned over and over again by various things that something could result in harm or hurt, possibly even death. My mother was kind of afraid of the water, and she was, don't go to the water, don't go to the water. And it's easy to don't go to the water because it's dangerous, condition someone. But Psalm 91 contains a message for us. Notice what verses 1 and 2 say. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress. My God, in Him will I trust. First thing I want us to consider is that we have to face our fears. Now, I'll talk more about this a little bit later, but right now I think we have what we can call good fears and we can have bad fears. Here is a list of the fears as you read through this psalm. It talks about snares, deadly pestilences, terror by night, arrows by day, pestilence, evil, plagues, lion and cobra. Now, these things are very, very real. But then there are some fears that we have that are not real. Now, fears that we readily see. Over the years, we have learned to understand that, if I take my knife and I run it across my hand, that because my knives are generally fairly sharp, it's going to cut me and it's going to hurt. So I am not going to take a knife and do that because fear of pain has taught me that's going to hurt. Same thing, we have learned that fire burns. It hurts. So we are careful with fire. But here's the thing. According to the statistics that we understand, 60% of what we are afraid of never happens. 12% of our fears are about our health. And many of those things we can do things about by change of lifestyle. 10% of what we're afraid of deals with our past. There are things that are in the past that most likely are never going to occur again, but yet we continue to dwell on them and think about them. 10% are also just petty miscellaneous superstitions. Some people take these things very literally, step on a crack, break your mother's back kind of things. And then only 8% of our fears are legitimate fears. Now, the Bible talks about lions and cobras. I do not walk around worried that I am going to be mauled by a lion day by day, because for me, that's just not a legitimate threat. I mean, in all my years of living here, I have only known of one lion. And that was somebody who released a lion many, many years ago because they didn't know what to do with it. And even then, that was still about 20 miles away from where I live. Then there are the fears that are rarely seen. These are the snares. These are the terror by nights. These are disasters. They are serpents. These are situations that we are confronted with that are just completely unexpected. We start the day with optimism and with cheerfulness, and we are suddenly with something that is totally unexpected. And sometimes because of this, our spirits are paralyzed. We are shackled by fear and we plunge into despair. But here's the thing. God tells us time and time again, do not be afraid, do not fear, fear not. These statements are not suggestions. They are commands. And remember, 60% of what we are afraid of is not going to happen at all. It is just things that we imagine. Have you ever been afraid to get a shot, or maybe been afraid of the needle to have blood drawn? Maybe you've gone to the dentist and you've been a little bit afraid about that. And when everything is all over, it's like, that wasn't half as bad as I imagined it to be. Now, I've had a couple root canals over my lifetime, and I've always heard these horror stories about root canal. And so when doctor said, we're going to have to do a root canal on this tooth because of an infection that's there. And I am like, oh my goodness, root canal. After it was all said and done, I really didn't have any complications at all. To me, it wasn't as bad as having a tooth filled at that time. President James Garfield said, I have many fears in my life, but the worst of them never came. And President Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but rather he has given us a spirit of love and of self-control. Now, we have to fight our fears. Our fears attack us, or we attack them. And we must be proactive in recognizing our fears and in resisting our fears. Our fears come from our human side and the divine side if we are to overcome them. Now, when I say we have the human side and we have the divine side in overcoming our fears, a lot of people will instinctively misinterpret what I'm saying before I can explain it. I don't like heights. Therefore, I have put myself in a situation where I am in high areas so that I sort of, become accustomed to higher places. I don't like roller coasters, so I intentionally rode roller coasters over and over again until it's no longer fear, but a sense of excitement. That's not what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is our human side in that, well, let's just look at verse 14 and verse 15 of this psalm. The psalmist writes, because he has set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high because he hath known my name. He hath called upon me and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. So here's what God is saying here. Because he loves me, I will rescue him. I will protect him because he acknowledges or he knows my name, which means we have a knowledge of him. We know him in an intimate manner. He calls upon me and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. So here's what it comes down to. Because he loves me, God says he will deliver me. I can count on him. God says, I will protect him, for he acknowledges my name. Therefore, instead of concentrating on your fear, concentrate on the protection of God. And let me say this. I think sometimes there is a misinterpretation of this psalm that God is going to protect us. He's going to deliver us. He is going to keep us from all of this harm. That's not what this psalm is saying. This psalm is saying God is going to be present there with us, and that God is going to be our protection during this time. While the King James Version doesn't literally say this in the book of Daniel, I really think that this is the heart of the matter. When the three Hebrews were about to be thrown in the fiery furnace, the king Nebuchadnezzar goes, "And who is the God that will deliver you out of my wrath?" And the Hebrew children says, "Our God will deliver us out of your hand." Now, yes, God miraculously delivered them. They were not burnt. They did not smell of smoke. But I think that when you really read between the lines, what the Hebrews are saying is God will deliver us out of your hand from the fire or by the fire. We will be protected from the fire, or the fire will consume us, and you can't do anything else to us, and we will be in heaven with him forever. Now, it also goes on to say, he will call me and I will answer him. Therefore, when you are afraid, pray. And God has promised, I will be with him in trouble. To take the words of Jesus, I will never leave you or forsake you. Now, in verse 2, or 1 and 2, when we come back to that, we are sheltered by the Most High, that we are in the shelter of God. We are in the shadow of the Almighty when we trust in him. The idea here is to pitch our tent and to dwell with God. We are dwelling with God when we put our trust in him. We are in his shadow, meaning that we are in close proximity to him, and we are in a great position of love with him. We are in the safety of God. God is a refuge. God is a fortress. These are places of time of trouble that you can go to. There was one time I was very young and went to the courthouse with my mom, and there was this sign here that I now know is a radioactive nuclear fallout warning type sign. And I asked my mom, what is that? And she goes, well, in time of disaster, this place has been designated as a shelter where you can come and you can find safety. Well, that's what God's presence is a shelter where we can come to find safety. God does not make provision for painless living, but God makes a provision for fearless listening. Listen to what David says in Psalm 34, verse 4. I sought the Lord, and he heard me, and he delivered me from my fears. Notice what David says. He doesn't say, God delivered me from the danger, the threats, or the hurts, but he said, God delivered me from my fears. I love Psalm 23. It contains that expression, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And it goes on to say that you have prepared a table for me in the presence of mine enemies. David experienced dark valleys, dreadful moments, and dreadful enemies. Do you remember the story in Mark chapter 4 of when Jesus and the disciples are on the Sea of Galilee, and all of a sudden the storm came up, and the disciples come to Jesus and say, Teacher, don't you care that we're perishing? And Jesus stood up and he rebuked the wind and the waves and the sea and said to them, Peace, be still. Sometimes God does calm the storm, but God always calms us in the storm. So what have we learned about fearless living? Admit you have fears. You may say, do you ever fear? Yes. When I do, I say with David, who single-handedly, barehandedly killed a lion and a bear and Goliath, said, what time I am afraid, I will trust in the Lord. Submit your fears to God. Remember the fear nots that are just in this one particular psalm. God is not the author of fear. Commit yourself to God's care because God is our fortress. we can consciously dwell with him under his shadow in the safety of him who is our fortress. So, in conclusion, let me ask you, what is your greatest fear, dilemma, or anxiety or concern today? The future, your family, your finances, your health, death? God's people have faced them all. We can face our fears in faith by turning to the face of God. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Holy Father, as we come before your throne of grace, we thank you that we do not have to live in fear, that fear is just the complete opposite of what you have for your children, that you have given us love and hope, and Father, you want us to live fearlessly because we can trust in you, knowing that you will never leave us or forsake us. We pray, Father, for this protection, this promise to be made true in our lives as we continue to live through these turbulent days. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.